The sea was never silent not. Truly, even in the dead of a North Atlantic night, when the wind fell slack and the stars pinned themselves coldly to the vault above, the ocean whispered, a low throom through the hull. The creak of overstressed teeth, the hiss of brine against steel, sounds that had long since woven themselves into the fabric of my sleep. But that evening, the silence that settled over the radio room aboard HMS Blackwood was different. It was the silence of dread-thin, brittle, charged with the static of a signal yet unwritten, a consequence yet I remember the lamp casting its jaundiced glow over the receiver's dials, the phosphoneedles trembling as if straining to obey some unseen conductor. Outside, the swell rolled in lazy, indifferent arcs, the destroyer pitching gently beneath me, like a cradle for ghosts. It was June 1942, and the war had already carved its initials deep into my bones. I'd been a telegraphist for 3 years by then. Ever since I lied about my age in Liverpool and slipped past the recruiting officer's tired eyes, the Admiralty Cypher procedures were second nature. Authentication. Decryption using the current Naval Enigma key shark, as we called it. In hushed tones and immediate destruction of the original afterlogging. It was a BAMS broadcast, 2 Allied merchant ships intercepted from an Italian relay station near Bordeaux, but decrypted as originating from Naval Group West in Paris. Priority Alpha. My fingers moved automatically, transcribing the 5-letter groups onto the green-lined pad, KFES, or T Coupe LAN, MAR, EUBA. The rotors of the Type 10 Cypher machine were in counterpoint to my pulse. I fed the tape through, watching the decrypted stream resolve letter by letter under the lamp's sickly amber eye. Convoy on 102, departing Halifax in 3 days' time. Escort composition, 2 corvettes, 1 destroyer hours, Blackwood included, and 19 merchant vessels carrying grain, medical supplies, locomotive parts destined for Liverpool's starving docks. Routine, except for the final line, stamped with the Admiralty's Black Seal. Intel confirms U-boat patrol line Hecht, repositioned to 52, N36W. Expect heavy engagement, message classification, ultra-secret. Destroy after reading. No dissemination. I should have incinerated the sheet then. The stove in the corner stood ready, its iron maw cold but hungry. But the coordinates it wasn't just Hecht was a wolfpack. Yes, 6 confirmed submarines under the command of Komet and Caping, but the decrypted traffic referenced something else. Operation Sea, a surface raider sortie involving the auxiliary cruiser Komet, disguised as a neutral freighter, armed with hidden 15 centimeters guns and torpedoes. If ON-102 sailed blind into that trap, it wouldn't be a convoy battle, it would be a massacre. The Komet didn't sink ships. She annihilated them. And yet the order stood. Destroy the message. No warning to ON-102. No rerouting. The Admiralty had already made the calculus sacrifice the convoy to protect the source of the intelligence, to preserve the illusion that Enigma remained unbroken. 1,000 souls weighed against the secrecy of a machine. My hands didn't tremble. That surprised me. They lay flat on the desk, veins tracing blue rivers beneath skin gone pale as ship's paint. Outside, the lookouts changed watch, their boots thudding softly on the deck above. Somewhere below, the galley stew simmered, its greasy aroma curling through the ventilation slats. I could smell it: onions, tinned beef, salt. The ordinariness of it nearly broke me. I thought of the merchantmen, Norwegian captains who'd lost families to Luftwaffe raids, Canadian boys barely older than I was, stokers from Glasgow who sang hymns in the engine rooms. None of them knew they'd been marked for erasure in the name of a larger victory. The war demanded obedience, discipline, clean hands. But as I stared at the decrypted figures, the exact latitude where the Komet would lie in wait, the precise window when ON-102 would pass within gun range, I felt something shift in my chest like a compass needle swinging wildly off true north. There was a secondary transmitter in the aft compartment, rarely used, reserved for distress signals on the international 500 kHz frequency. It wasn't monitored by naval intelligence, not closely anyway. And the Germans, they listened to everything. Always had. They'd pick up a stray SOS, A garbled mayday, even a test burst. If I could encode the warning, not as intelligence, but as a merchant distress, call Similit, a crippled freighter broadcasting from 52 N36W, then perhaps someone would hear it. Not just the U-boats, the Komet. If she thought a ship was already sinking, she might delay her ambush, reposition, hesitate. Hesitation was all those sailors needed. 20 minutes. That's all it would take for the convoy to veer 50 miles north, outside the kill zone. I didn't pray. I hadn't since the bombing of Plymouth. But as I reached for the spare signal pad, my fingers found the edge of my mother's rosary still, tucked in my tunic pocket. Though I hadn't touched it in months, the beads were smooth from years of anxious handling, cool against my palm. I set them down gently beside the transmitter. Then I began to key the message. Not in Naval Cypher, no! 3, but in plain Morse, disguised as a pan-pan call, SS Maple Crown, engine failure, drifting, position 52, N36, W seeking escort. I inserted false call signs, mimicked the static-list cadence of a damaged vessel. Every click of the key felt like a hammer blow to my own ribs. When I finished, I didn't wait. I fed the original Ultra message into the stove, watched the paper curl into ash. Then I erased the logs, wiped the Type-X dials clean, and sat perfectly still in the lamplight, listening to the silence return not. The seas whisper now, but the heavy, waiting quiet of a man who has just torn a hole in the world and doesn't he yet know what will pour through. The next 48 hours passed like a fever dream wrapped in fog. I moved through my duties, with mechanical precision relaying routine fleet coordinates, logging weather reports, even sharing a cigarette with Petty Officer Finch during the midnight watch. But inside, I was adrift in a current of my own making. Every footstep on the deck above sent a jolt through my spine. Every glance from the signals officer, Lieutenant Hivers, felt like an accusation suspended in the salt-laced air. The sea had thickened into a milky gray broth, visibility down to a few hundred yards, the kind of weather U-boats loved and escorts loathed. Blackwood's engines thrummed a steady 14 knots, pushing us toward a rendezvous we were no longer meant to keep, though none aboard knew it but me. I'd seen the altered course plotted on the chart room tabula, slight northerly deviation, logged as weather avoidance, and for the first time, hope coiled cold and thin in my gut. Added Wargid, had anyone heard. Then, on the third morning, just past dawn, the wireless crackled with a foreign signal. Not Allied, not Italian. German, clear, strong, and urgent. My blood turned to ice water. It was a Kriegsmarine tactical broadcast on 6.2 megahertz, encrypted in the short signal cipher used by surface raiders. My training screamed at me to ignore it, to log it as unreadable interference, but my hands were already reaching for the Type-X. I hadn't slept in 2 days. My eyes burned, my mouth tasted of copper and stale tea, but the rotors turned with a will of their own. The decryption came slowly, painfully, as though the machine itself resisted. Komet to Group West. Abort seat. False distress in Sector 52 to 36 confirmed decoy. Convoy diverted north. Recommend wolfpack Hecht. Reposition immediately. Suspect compromised channel. I sat back so hard the stool groaned. My message had reached them. Not as a warning, but as a phantom, a ghost ship conjured from static and desperation. And they'd believed it. Enough to call off the trap, enough to spare ON 102, 19 merchantmen, 400 crew, countless lives in Liverpool waiting for flour, for penicillin, for hope. I should have felt relief. Instead, a deeper dread settled over me, heavier than any depth charge. Because if the Germans suspected a compromised channel, if they traced that phantom distress back to its origin, they wouldn't blame a malfunctioning transmitter. They'd assume a mole. And who handled every signal aboard Blackwood? Me. Just me. The days that followed were a study in silence. I spoke only when spoken to, ate little, and avoided the wardroom entirely. The ship's routine became a shield. The metallic clang of breakfast tins, the rasp of boot brushes on wet decks, the low chant of the sonar operator scanning for submarine shadows. But beneath it all, my mind said I'd broken the most sacred trust of wartime intelligence. Not for glory, not for ideology, but for a flicker of pity, a refusal to let men drown without so much as a whispered heads-up. Was that bravery? Or cowardice dressed in compassion's clothes? The question gnawed at me like rats in the bilge. I thought of the oath I'd sworn in Liverpool. To serve His Majesty with loyalty, discretion, and obedience. Obedience. The word tasted like ash now. Then came the Admiralty dispatch. Routine channel. Routine priority, but my name was in it. Not explicitly, never that, but the phrasing was unmistakable. All signals personnel aboard vessels attached to western approaches. Commander reminded that unauthorized transmission on undesignated frequencies is subject to immediate court-martial under Articles the 19 and 45 of the Naval Discipline Act. It was a net cast wide, but I stood alone in its center. That night, I climbed to the forecastle under the pretense of checking the aerial lines. The wind off the Atlantic cut through my duffel coat like a blade. Below, the sea heaved in black swells, phosphorescent trails flickering in the troughs like dying stars. I thought of jumping, not out of guilt, but exhaustion. The weight of what I'd done and what I might still face felt too vast to carry. But then I remembered the faces I'd never see. The baker in Glasgow who'd get his flour. The child in Manchester who'd survived pneumonia because of that penicillin. The dock worker who'd rebuild his home with timber from those holes. They'd never know my name. Never know the message I was meant to burn. And perhaps that was the point. Weeks passed. The Admiralty inquiry never came. Owen 102 reached Liverpool with only minor damage. A single torpedo hit on the Empire Dawn, patched in 3 hours. The official report cited fortunate weather evasion. No mention of phantom distress calls. No suspicion fell on Blackwood. I began to believe I'd gotten away with it. Until the letter arrived, not through naval post, a civilian envelope, hand-delivered by a shore party in Reykjavik. No return address. Just 3 lines, typed on thin onion paper. The sea keeps secrets. But not all of them. You did right. Keep silent. There was no signature, but tucked inside was a single U-boat Kilmarkina, small metal eagle with a swastika, scratched through with a knife. I buried it in the sand that night, far from the base, and walked back with empty hands and a quieter conscience. Years later, after the war, I read a declassified report in the London Gazette, buried in an appendix on anomalous signal intercepts. June-July 1942 was a footnote, unverified merchant distress call, 500 ka Ceseta, June 18, 1942. Origin, undetermined. May have influenced German raider deployment. No name, Novlame, just a sentence. And I knew then that history doesn't reward disobedience but in that erasure lies a kind of mercy. I never spoke of it again. Not even to my wife, but sometimes, on still nights, when the sea is calm and the stars hang low, I sit by the window and listen. Not for signals, not for ghosts. Just for the silence that followed the message I was supposed to destroy, and the thousands who lived because I didn't.